Welcome everybody, welcome to Ed Cruz, the last lesson, episode 5 I believe, yes. Episode 5, and I don't have a title for this. I was thinking maybe along the lines of calling it Smiling. You can see the creative geniuses as my brain thinks of like new ways to come up with titles. Yeah, let's call it Smiling. Sounds good, sounds simple, and I have to do less work from that. So, you know, oftentimes when you work with your teacher or vice versa, when you're working with your teacher's always, if a good teacher, I believe, a good teacher is always like looking at a student. He gives a lesson and the student does it, and you see him whether you're doing a drill or doing an exercise or maybe doing chisa, that your teacher's smiling. And you know, to give you an example of why the teacher's smiling is because if you think about it, on day 1 you learn about Ichikimiman. Okay, and Ichikimiman itself, excuse me, Ichikimiman itself is like, you know, the simplest lesson. There's basically 4 steps to open up your stance, and then the next thing you know, you can actually, you know, get through that within less than 5 minutes, and you're like, okay, I know the stance, everything's good, let's go on to the next lesson, and so forth. And it's perfectly okay, you know, like I said, to go through that process, because, you know, when you learn lessons in life or in general, there's really no meaning to it. I mean, someone can tell you, like your parents would tell you, for example, this is important, don't touch a stove, it's hot, and so forth. But there's no meaning to it at that particular time. But the further you understand Wing Chun, you understand that the simplest things, the easiest things are actually most difficult. And the things that your teacher does that makes things look so simple actually is not because of the difficulty level of what he's doing it at. It's because of the basics that he's perfected over and over and over again. See, most people will practice hard and they think they know exactly which route to go, but the key is that the simplest things, the most things that seem like the most to be boring as well, is bypassed by many and overlooked. You know, for a long time, I'm sure they're still out there. I haven't checked personally. There was always like Wing Chun versus something, and you know, there wasn't really much to watch as far as the video, because as soon as the video started, you can see how the person stands, and you knew that guy was going to get his ass kicked, and more than likely that was the Wing Chun guy, because the stance in itself is so, I guess, you know, it's such a fair balance, because it seems so simple, but yet it seems so at the same time overlooked, and at the same time, it's the stance, if you master it in itself, will give you the skill that you actually require. That's why Wing Chun actually fails for several reasons. One, because the majority of people who do Wing Chun, their stance totally sucks. That's just the reality of it. But that's okay. There's, you know, you think the stance isn't that important, and you jump into the punches, and because your stance sucks, your punches are going to suck, and so forth and so forth. And you see the chain reaction that occurs from it. But here's the thing that people fail to see is because if you look at the depth of what the stance is trying to teach you, is something so simple, right? You're basically looking to create a stretch from the top of your neck, the neck area back here, right? And then from the L4, L5 region, right? A little bit about the L4, L5 region where you could actually pop it out in the back and create a tension. So for the most part, if you can maintain this tension, a natural tension of being straight on its own, and then you encompass the fact that from your feet, the feet have a function of trying to level you centered in between that point. So if you can imagine a circle and then you in the hole, that's all the stance basically is. Simple and easy, right? You open up the stance and that's basically your goal. So maintain this tension, keep it centered, and then everything should, from there, be awesome. But that's where it gets difficult, because having people maintain that stance or that stretch tension is often overlooked and misunderstood, and often misapplied too, right? Because when you see people try to apply Wing Chun, they get into a stance, and then they're in fighting stance, and that's how you really fight. The stance, as always, I've always said it, is basically a development stage. Once you know how to control your center of gravity, you can stand as naturally as you want, but that's a problem. How exactly do we get from point A to B? Because people are like, oh, okay, I opened up the stance and I'm practicing 10, 15, 20 years, and next thing you know, you're missing the bigger component of what's happening. Because here's the thing, right? If you know how to do the stance correctly, okay, you know how to do the stance correctly, several things come from that. Several things come from that, from the sense that when the force comes towards you, right? As soon as the force comes towards you, right? If you can do the stance properly, you can bounce that force automatically, okay? You can bounce that force automatically. If you can bounce that force automatically, then in turn, the weight that's being put upon you can actually be redirected and not sent down directly to you. Most often times, ask yourself this when you do a drill. For example, something as simple as doing punch drill and you're blocking with pak sound. You feel, he does a pak, or he does a punch and you do the pak, and you feel like you blocked it, but all of a sudden you feel like that 10 pounds becomes 20 pounds. Because what happens is that stance, while seemingly working correctly, is not functioning actually correct, okay? And I know I'm talking a little bit in depth as far as the level of which you can, what's being lost and so forth, because functionality of the stance is not there. Because if the force comes in towards you, you should be able to bounce off that force. But at the same time, the ability to direct the force down to the ground and then bounce it off is often really misunderstood and hard to do. Because here's the thing, like I said, in step one of doing the stance, you have to maintain that tension. If you can't maintain this tension of standing straight and then making sure it's at the center of gravity, you won't be able to do it. And people are like, well, why is that so difficult? Why can't people do it? Why does it take years to do it? Here's the simple formula for learning the stance is from doing Sil Tao, and for, not like for 2 minutes or 3 minutes, but doing the actual form for the amount of length it's requiring, it's just a stretch, a stretch, a stretch, a stretch. It's almost like building a muscle memory as far as, okay, here I'm standing, and then in the beginning I stand like this, I don't know how to stand, and eventually you stand like this so often, so long, so many times, so many hours practicing, that it comes about naturally. And then the thing is, if you don't understand that concept, you won't be able to develop that skill, which is okay, because that's why teachers smile and laugh, because oftentimes students hear the lesson, but they don't clearly understood it. And for me, I can't say right off the bat I understood it right away, because to give you a little history, back in 2000, right? That's when I've been learning Wing Chun prior to that, but back in 2000, I call that as the start day as far as when I was working with my teacher. It took me 4 years, and there was a certain video, and you might have seen that when you say Wing Chun. It was called superior blocking, right? Superior blocking. And I was like, at the time, I was like, if I do this motion, if I flare this up, use a certain kind of speed, a different kind of timing with this, maybe then I can, disrupt what he's doing, get his timing off. But it took months and months of watching that video over and over again, and then realizing that it had nothing to do with what my hands were doing or anything else, but it actually had a lot to do with actually looking. I was like, wait a second. I looked at his stance and I looked at mine, and it didn't look so blatantly obvious, but in the beginning, but when I finally looked at it, I was like, holy crap. That's when it really hits you, when you understand that, damn, my stance sucked, right? It has to come to that realization. It's like, wow, it's so simple, but yet it can do so much, but yet you kind of overlook it because it's kind of boring to do in practice. But yeah, that's when everything started to change, when I started understanding and appreciating, wow, this is why you have to practice this. This was why this actually gave meaning for me as far as why to practice that stance over and over again. So in essence, okay, if you're struggling in Wing Chun, you want to get good in Wing Chun, right? The base foundation starts with the stance. Knowing how to do the stance is one thing. Understanding why you're doing it and how to develop it properly is another. So if you can get to this goal, natural straight spine, right? And then have it centered. And then when the force comes in, you'll automatically adjust. Automatically adjust. You don't have to be like, force is here and I have to adjust my center of gravity. No, if you can maintain this and then keep your center of gravity in place, you will see how exponentially your Wing Chun will improve over and over again in a significant way. But at the same time, if you fail to go that route, then, well, don't worry. Don't worry about it. Everyone else will be smiling. All right, hope you enjoy and understand that lesson. Simple.